is how to participate in the California legislative process. Before we discuss specifics about participating in the legislative process here in California, we need to understand some basics of the legislative process. First, where do we find the rules governing the California legislative process? One, in the Constitution, two, the government code, and then three, the legislature's internal rules. The California legislative process is also heavily dependent upon the legislative calendar and specified deadlines. Now, some of these rules are found in the Constitution in Article 4. Others are found in the Government Code, and many others are in the Joint Rules, Assembly Rules, and Senate Rules. For example, the first Monday in December in the even-numbered year, when the two-year session convenes, November 30th, when the two-year session concludes in the second even-numbered year, August 31st in the even-numbered year when the legislature adjourns, and January 31st in the even-numbered year when two-year bills have to clear their house of origin. Those are constitutional deadlines. Also be aware of key legislative publications, the daily files in the Assembly and Senate, the daily journals, and the weekly histories. And those can be obtained from the legeinfo.legislature.ca.gov website. So let's get started on our general overview of the legislative process to acquaint you with those basics in order to better understand and enable you on how to participate in the California legislative process. Keep in mind that like the U.S. Congress, the California legislature is bicameral with an assembly, 80 members, and a Senate, 40 members. Two houses, they meet in biennial sessions. Legislators must be at least 18 years of age and a U.S. citizen. Pursuant to Prop 28, approved by our voters in June of 2012, legislators may serve a maximum of 12 years in the state office, and they can serve all 12 of those years in one house or in a combination of the two. Keep in mind that the assembly members are elected every 2 years and the senators every 4 years. Legislators have both personal and committee staff to assist them in performing the duties of their offices, and the legislature is served by additional professional staff members, including those at the Office of Legislative Counsel, the Legislative Analyst, the Bureau of State Audits, and the Legislative Data Center. There are essentially two paths to lawmaking in California. The initiative is the power reserved to the voters to propose statutes and amendments to the California Constitution. The other path, of course, is for the legislature to pass bills and for the governor to act on those, thereby creating a statute. A piece of legislation begins when a group, organization, legislator, lobbyist suggests legislation to either a senator or an assembly member who then agrees to author the bill. That bill idea is submitted to the attorneys at the Legislative Counsel Bureau for drafting. Once introduced, the bill is printed, no action occurs for the first 30 days, and then the Rules Committee assigns the bill to a committee for a hearing. Bills are assigned to at least one policy committee according to their subject matter, and likely, in about 80% of the cases, assigned to the fiscal committee, which we call appropriations, if there's some fiscal impact to the state or local governments or requiring the expenditure of public funds. Committee processes include a bill analysis, a hearing, and obviously a vote. At the bill hearings, the author presents his or her measure, followed by witnesses speaking for and then against the bill, the author making closed remarks, and then the committee debates or questions the measure, and then they can take action to pass it as is, pass it with amendments, or vote against the bill or hold it in committee. After passage again from one or more policy committees, onto the fiscal committee it goes, and then to the floor. There's the second reading and the third reading. The second reading file is for bills passing out of the committee. They're read a second time, and then they're assigned to third reading for final consideration. And after the bill is read a third time, it's explained by the author, discussed by legislators on the floor, and voted on by all the members of the Assembly or the Senate. If the bill is approved in its house of origin, then the bill is transmitted to the second or the other house. If the bill is defeated, on the other hand, the member can seek reconsideration and one additional vote. Most bills in the legislature, about 90% of them, require a simple majority for passage. That's 21 votes in the 40-member Senate and 41 votes in the 80-member Assembly. However, there are some measures that require a supermajority, such as 2/3, which is 27 votes in the Senate and 54 in the Assembly. Those that require an urgency clause, bond measures, several appropriations bills, constitutional amendments, and a number of bills that amend initiatives passed by the voters, such as the Political Reform Act, Prop 103, and others, require that 2/3 vote. If a measure then is approved on the floor, the bill, of course, goes to the other house, and that process repeats itself. When the bill is approved by the second house or the house of origin for a concurrence vote, then the bill goes on to the governor. The governor actually has generally 12 days to act on a measure. That is extended later at the end of session. The governor has 3 actions he or she can take: sign the bill and it becomes a statute, veto the bill and return it to the House of Origin, or allow the bill to become law, i.e. a statute without the governor's signature. Now, this deadline is extended to 30 days at the end of session when the governor has to consider hundreds, if not close to 1,000 bills approved by the 2 houses during the final weeks of the session. Thereafter, the Secretary of State gives a chapter number to the bill, and it generally becomes law on January 1st of the following year, although urgency bills, budget bills, and a handful of other ones take effect immediately upon the governor's signature. So now that we have an understanding of the California legislative process, how do individuals and interest groups participate in the legislative process? Well, of course, you can communicate orally by phone, meeting, testifying, or in writing, letter, or email, for example. It should be obvious, but the sooner you communicate, the better chance you have. That means, for example, reaching out to the legislator or his or her staff before a vote is actually scheduled on a bill. There are essentially 3 main avenues for public participation in the legislative process: meetings, writing, testimony. In other words, meet with the elected or appointed officials and their staff, write letters, testify in a committee. I give you a handful of suggestions for engaging in these 3 forms in the legislative process. So keep these ideas in mind when you're meeting with or communicating with an elected legislator or their staff. First impressions matter. If you represent an organization, introduce yourself. Tell the legislator the name and mission of your organization. If you're lobbying as an individual, be sure to introduce yourself and to measure or mention any relevant history or other ties that you might have, and explain what the issue is that you want to discuss, what your position is, and what action you want your meeting to individual legislator staff to actually take. Of course, offer supporting facts as to why the official should take action as you're recommending. If you've got a personal story or other concrete examples that can highlight the importance of your position, explaining why you care about the bill, offer it at this time. Mention other organizations, influential people in the district, federal or local government officials, and others who might support your position. Of course, don't forget to do some basic research before your meeting so that you know a little bit about the elected official. Be a good listener as well. After you make your pitch, allow the official or their staff to respond. Also, try to give your lawmaker and their staff a leave behind, a 1 or 2 page fact sheet that outlines your position, explain what the bill does or doesn't do, and why they should support it or not support it. And always thank the elected official and their staff for their time, even if, for example, they didn't agree with your position. Now, when you have a written communication, be sure to keep your letter short, no more than a page or 2. If you know the hearing date, be sure to include it. Include the bill number and the author and a short explanation of what the bill does. Of course, state your support or opposition in the very first sentence. Provide concrete and credible information on the impact of the bill, how it will impact your organization, your industry, you as an individual. Be sure to send copies to the governor's office and the Department of Finance, as well as the committee staff. And if you've put together an account for the legislative portal, be sure to upload your bill letter to the portal and act promptly. Remember, you want to communicate before the voting takes place. And lastly, in testifying, keep a few guidelines in mind. Be presentable, professional, and moderate in both your appearance and your conduct. Remember, first impressions matter. Address your comments and attention to the committee members, not the audience behind you. Address the committee members by name and title. You should introduce yourself at the start of the hearing to Madam Chair or Mr. Chairman. In your introduction, what's your name, your title if you have one, and the organization you represent if you do. Talk, try not to read, speak loud enough to be heard, and be aware that others have testified and don't repeat testimony. Also, keep in mind that in most instances, for those who are selected as one of the two principal witnesses in support or opposition, you rarely have more than 2 minutes. Otherwise, you are a so-called Me Too witness, where you're simply giving your name, title, organization, and whether you support or oppose the bill. So those are some practical do's and don'ts for participating in the California legislative process.